Hello and welcome to this episode of Hospitality Talks. I'm Katy Moses, founder and MD of CAM, and I am joined today by Dan Hawkie, who is the Chief Commercial Officer, as I've just found out, of TiPJAR. Dan, can you give us a little bit of information as to who you are and what TiPJAR do?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for inviting me along today, Casey. My career in hospitality goes back to when I left school at 16, moved into the hotel sector. I worked in frontline hospitality for like 13, 14 years, mainly in hotels, GM and ops level, that kind of thing. I took a step into the dark side, the supplier side, about 9, 10 years ago now. Probably gives my age away a little bit there as well. And the main reason is I wanted to make a big impact on the sector. As a GM or an ops, you only have a certain impact that you can make within a business. And I've been fortunate enough to work for some amazing suppliers in that meantime in the last 10 years. TiPJAR being one of them. I was super excited to join just over a year ago. And our mission is to try and help operators streamline their tips and trunk distributions, improve employee engagement, employee retention rates, and really help support operators with the challenges that are faced, especially with the budget that's coming up in April as well.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I'm sure we'll get on to that. You and I had a bit of a catch up at last week's Lease and Tenanted Spotlight. Thank you very much for joining us. And there I was very much struck by this idea that licensees in the L&T sector, their sort of primary concern is what has happened in the budget, is those decisions that have been made by the Labour government. Tell us what that means for the average pub.
I mean, it's crippling for most businesses, but the independents especially. I think UK Hospitality released some figures a couple of weeks ago to say that currently there's 1.2 million workers that work in hospitality that we don't have to pay national insurance contributions on. The change to the threshold has meant that there's probably now like 775,000, give or take, that are now included in that. So only 450,000 are left that we don't have to pay it for. I
Right.
started to work out when the budget was released in October. If you're working more than 7 hours a week, you're probably then as a worker, you're going to have to pay employee national insurance contributions, but the employees are then having to contribute to that, and that's colossal. Then you add on the 1.2% increase in national insurance contributions as well. I think UK said about £1 billion is going to add to the bill for the hospitality sector, in addition to everything else that we have going on as well. And we're still dealing with, huge price increases, utility costs, still dealing with the fallout from Brexit and COVID and everything else. National minimum wage goes up 10% as well. It's just like it's a perfect storm actually for our sector at the minute, and it's worrying for most of the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's worrying for anyone in any position within our sector as well, whether you're in a head office role, whether you're in a frontline role. And actually, I interviewed for Hospitality Talks. I interviewed Kate Nichols the day after the budget, and we kind of looked at each other in a bit of shock. It really was a shock to see the figures that she was sharing with me at that stage. So the reason that I wanted to talk to you today is because I know TiPJAR very well, big fan, and I know that you have some practical advice for licensees, well, for hospitality in general, but we were specifically talking about licensees and publicans. Where do you see there is room for, or there is the ability to mitigate some of the negative effects of the budget decisions?
Yeah, I guess if we think about national insurance contributions as the main part of this subject here, we are dealing with so many pub operators that have been paying national insurance on trunk over the past 5, 10 years. Luckily for us at TiPJAR, we have a line with the trunk advisor whereby we can refer them over to him, and he'll look to do national insurance rebates for up to like 6 years. So we're dealing with some pretty big pub companies that are now getting hundreds of thousands of pounds of rebates, and the employees are getting these rebates as well. And this is the thing, if you've got a valid trunk policy in place and
Mm.
a trunk master, it means you do not need to pay national insurance on trunk. Employer receive tips. So there's a big benefit there for operators. So if you don't have a trunk policy or a trunk master, but you're taking credit card tips or service charge in your business, get those two things in place. Obviously, we can help, but they can actually manage it themselves. We're here to support for anyone that wants an automated process on that basis.
And how would I know if I'm Katy Moses Pub Company, which I wouldn't name it after myself, although the history of my company would say says otherwise. But if I am Katy Moses Pub Company, how do I know if I'm eligible for these rebates? How do I find out?
Yeah, so there's this term about employer received tips. If you're physically taking tips in the business as an operator, typically credit card and service charge, that type of thing, optional, I must stress at that point. Otherwise, you would have to pay national insurance.
Yeah.
It's optional tips. You just need to have a valid trunk policy. And the trunk policy should obviously fit in line with the new tipping legislation that came out in October of last year as well.
Yeah.
And a trunk master. A trunk master is someone that is not influenced by the business, therefore can't be a director. We'd highly advise against someone internally being the case if they're on a performance-based bonus scheme. And that's where a lot of operators will go external. That's why we're working with some of the biggest pub companies in the UK, because they want to externalize this. They also want to automate the whole process. But yeah, if you have a valid trunk master and a valid trunk policy, and you're taking these tips in the business, you won't need to pay national insurance on these optional tips. And that's the key thing here. Right. The other thing that we need to consider, and I think the L&T sector as a whole, of its own kind of like area and subsector of hospitality, quite often the big pubcos have probably said, we don't want to touch tips. Yeah. And the licensees have probably said to themselves, oh, this seems like a bit of a nightmare. There's other ways around it. Yeah. And what I mean by that is there's other ways to take tips where the funds don't hit the business accounts. And luckily enough, this is where TiPJAR first started as a business with our digital tipping. We moved into tap-to-tip devices, which are perfect for wet-led community pubs. Yeah. And then we connect our PDQ integration. What we do in these instances is we ensure those funds never hit the business accounts, and therefore the business is not liable for the tax and the A&I on that. Right. No NI would need to be paid if it's dealt with and distributed by us to the employees anyway. And the tax is up to the employees to do. But the business doesn't want to touch them. And there's too often we see these really sad like glasses at the front of a bar, and it's got a sign on there and it says, oh, we only take cash tips. And what makes them more sad is there's nothing in there. And it's not because the service isn't great, it's because no one carries cash about anymore. And so what we want to do is, obviously we've got digital device with that. We do integrations and things as well. But it's a great way for operators to say, well, okay, we may not be able to give everyone in this business a 10% pay increase that goes in line with the national minimum wage. But as long as we're paying everyone a rate, we might be able to give some people 3 or 4% increase. If we can boost their tips in their business, it can make a big impact for the employees. And that's the big worry at the minute, is how are employees going to be fared? There's already talks about job cuts and like closing hours being very different and things, maybe even shutting up shop for a whole day. It's going to have a huge impact on these businesses. But if we can still boost earnings for the team members, it may make it a little bit easier for the business to circumnavigate the trouble in a few months ahead, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, I know from CAM research over the years that when we speak to hospitality employees, tips are important. They really do matter. And if you want to attract and retain the best hospitality employees, then you need to make sure that A, obviously, the legal side of things is sorted, but B, you are maximizing the opportunity for those people to be rewarded. So that sounds like a bit of a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, we're really fortunate that we can see all of the data that flows through, and we can see some team members that are earning a few £1,000s a month on tips and trunk. It's incredible. And I think back to my days in hotels. Hotels aren't always the best for tips when I think back to it, because so many people charge for a room. This service charge culture that has been bred means that pubs that don't have service charge in place, and I wouldn't condone it on that basis, but you're competing against employers that therefore can pay a lot more money because trunk is implemented. So actually putting schemes in place where you can still drive tips for your team members you've got to do it. You can't afford to allow people to rely on cash tips. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to generate enough tips in this society these days. And if you're a great employer for everything else, and you can get tips into the hands of your team members, they won't want to leave. It's a simple matter of fact. Employee engagement and retention will increase if you have the right tipping and trunk processes in place.
And also, of course, from a consumer point of view, happy employees make happy customers because they're going to go that extra mile. They're going to work that little bit harder, and then they're going to do it with a slightly bigger smile on their face. And actually, in hospitality, that's the holy grail, right? Is a happy customer that's had a brilliant experience. So, okay.
I think the book under here is under my laptop at the minute, propping this laptop up, is The Service Profit Chain. There's no better book to explain it. You look after teams, they will look after your customers, and they will look after your business. So it's a great book, but it's simple. I always break down hospitality when I was an operator as well. It's you look after your people, they'll look after your customers, and that'll look after the P&L.
Yeah.
It's as difficult as it is, it's not rocket science. We're a people-centric business and sector, and that will go a long way to help.
Okay. Any other practical advice? Anything else that you think? For anyone out there that's watching this, specifically, we started off talking about pub companies, but hospitality in general, anything else that you can share that's going to help us get through the next, as you say, tricky few months?
Yeah, I'd say don't be afraid to speak to the experts. Like a business like TiPJAR, we can give sound advice in terms of what works really well for businesses. We can start to put returns on investment in terms of putting the right trunk policy in place. And if you are looking at the service profit chain, we've got some great case studies that will show you look after the team members, you get better retention of staff members, you'll get higher like team member mentions on things like Google and TripAdvisor. You boost those ratings, it encourages more people to come into your venues, it encourages people to come back. Mm-hmm. So we can look at the right ways to I guess incentivize your team to do the right things. Yeah. As much as service charge is a big thing for TiPJAR because it facilitates a lot of tips, I'm not a massive fan of service charge because I believe it breeds complacency. Whereas if you actually put the right process in place and you encourage your team members to deliver the most amazing experiences, they will get tips, as many tips as they would have done through service charge, but the business will win because the customer will want to come back time and time again. So from a business perspective, that's some of the advice I would give. And from a personal perspective, we're also looking to try and support the sector. I don't know if we can do a plug on the hospitality talks.
Yeah, why not? Do a plug. I don't care. I don't know what it's for yet, but yes, go ahead.
So we sat at the L&T Spotlight event, and you've mentioned it, like the biggest increase in concerns for publicans is the rising employment costs. Yeah. You also heard the licensees ask for more support from suppliers and the big pubcos.
They're going to need it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I've never done this before in any of my businesses. I'm not a big fan because I always try and price the product accordingly. But we want to give any licensee, any tenant, a 3 months free, completely free of TiPJAR across any of our product lines, because we want to help them. That's based on signing up before the end of March, because we want you to be ready for April budgets so you see the big impact. Yeah. And it means by the summer months, when you'll start having to pay for our services, you'll be booming because we're going to have a lovely summer. Everyone's going to be in the pubs. Everyone's going to be having a great time. But yeah, so we'd like to offer 3 months completely free of any of our product lines for any licensees within the sector.
That's amazing. I think that's a fantastic offer. I think that's incredibly useful to the sector as a whole, actually. And we need to be able to support licensees as much as possible after April. And if that offer from TiPJAR means that licensees can have a better system overall, have happier employees, and then therefore more satisfied customers who have had a great experience, then I can't see a reason why we wouldn't do that. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to putting that out to the sector and actually contacting some of the licensees that I know personally and saying, this is something that I really believe could help you and help your business. Brilliant. Okay, well, I wasn't expecting that at the end, so that's fantastic. Thank you, Dan. We are out of time, so I'm going to have to stop us there. But Dan Hawkie, thank you so much for joining me on Hospitality Talks.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.